Run, ever run, ever run, run, run. Run for your life, the boy carries a gun. It went tick, tick, boom. It went tick, tick, boom. It went tick, tick, boom. It went tick, 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 boom. Run for your life, the boy carries a gun. Run, ever run, ever run, run, run. Run for your life, the boy carries a gun.
When the Germans take the European Central Bank to court in Karlsruhe, you'll be right in thinking that things aren't the May West in Europe. The problem for the Germans is that they had a plan. And that plan was that we'd all turn into little Germans when all the rest of Europe joined the euro. But at this stage, I'd like to quote that great American economist, Mike Tyson, who said of plans that everybody has a plan until they get a punch in the face. And the punch in the face that the Germans got was not only did we not turn into little Germans, but the Greeks actually became delinquently more Greek, the Spanish flamboyantly more Spanish, the Italians casually more Italian, and the Irish dementedly more Irish. And what's worse for the Germans is we did all this using their money. And when the Germans came looking for the money back, it was all gone. So where did it all go? Well, have you noticed the numbers of mercs on the streets of Athens, Dublin or Madrid these days? We borrowed German money to buy German stuff that the Germans had made initially. And this is why the Germans need the rest of Europe to do a deal. Because without trade, Germany suffers. What is actually happening in the euro is the German current account surplus is being recycled out of Germany because the Germans actually don't want to spend all the money they earn. Somebody else has got to spend it. Who's that somebody else? It's the periphery. And when the periphery spend German money, they tend to buy German goods. So in a way, the Germans are quids in. This is why Germany needs a deal. It needs to fix this problem as soon as it can. And this is why Mrs. Merkel is allowing the Italian ECB boss, Mr. Draghi, to indulge in that most Italian and frankly un-Germanic pursuit, which is printing money. She, Mrs. Merkel, is on the side of big business, and she is giving Mr. Draghi the green light to print as much money as he needs, or in his own words, to do whatever has to be done to preserve the euro. So Draghi is actually trying to turn the euro into the lira behind the backs of the average German punter. And this is why the German punters have taken the ECB to court in Karlsruhe. Now, thus far, Mr. Draghi has printed through the LTRO 1 trillion euros to bail out the bond markets of the periphery. Now, do you know how much this is? If we were to spend €1 million a day, it would take us 2,740 years to spend 1 trillion. It is a huge number, one followed by many, many zeros. This central bank money is cascading into asset markets on the periphery, pushing up asset prices just as the economies of Europe falter. And all this is driving asset prices way above where they actually should be. So in a sense, the recovery in European markets has been rented, not earned. And the more money the central bank prints in order to avoid assets falling back down to earth, the higher asset prices go, driving these prices yet higher and higher, further and further away from fair value. And thus, all of this is making more likely the crash that the very printing of all this money was designed to avoid in the first place. How do you best visualize this carry-on? Well, what I'm going to call this dilemma in financial markets, the Salvatore Ferragamo equilibrium. Salvatore Ferragamo was an Italian shoe designer who introduced wedges to Italian women in the 1930s. Now, obviously, wedges make a woman look taller than she is. And the taller you are, the more attractive you feel. This extra height allows you to wear different clothes and you tend to feel slimmer. Now, by driving a wedge between the actual height and the desired height, the shoe can improve your overall image, making the best of your material. Mario Draghi is the Salvatore Ferragamo of European financial markets, because he is driving a liquidity wedge between the actual performance of the European economy, which is weak and risky at best, and the observed performance of financial markets, which are behaving as if Europe's economy is strong, risk is minimal, and everything is rosy. Now, this is obviously a very dangerous game, because like somebody wearing wedges to attain a desired height, that person has to keep wearing wedges just to stay there. And similarly, the ECB has to keep injecting more and more liquidity simply to keep asset prices where they are. And all the time, the European economy, the fundamentals, is getting weaker and weaker as the liquidity trap in Europe, where people have too much debt and they don't want to borrow, and banks have too much bad debt and they don't want to lend, and austerity, where the government is cutting back, where both of these policies take their damning toll on demand. So where is all this going to end? Now, if you were to base your predictions on the last editorial of the Daily Telegraph, you would be certain that the entire European project will break apart at the seams and the euro will collapse. But the fastest way to lose money in Europe is to read the Daily Telegraph. Because more money has been lost in London betting on the end of the euro than in almost any other trade. And this is because the British, in general, want the project to fail. And rather than being analytical, the British get all Latin and emotional on Europe. And rather than weighing up the evidence on a cold, calculating British way, they fall in love with their own forecasts and the veracity of their worldview, falling into the very trap that no investor should ever do, which is to fall in love with your own view of the world. There is much more to Europe than the last flowery editorial of the Daily Telegraph or the last speech of UKIP. Every time there is a crisis in Europe, and you bring this all the way back to the 1980s, to the 1990s when sterling fell out of bed, to German unification prior to that, every single time there's a big crisis which has currency ramifications and economic ramifications in Europe, not only does the project not decelerate it, but it actually accelerates. It is because the European elite are fanatical about the project, and they have invested so much of their own personal, political credibility in the project, and this I mean politicians, bureaucrats, central bankers. They cannot countenance a different view to the view which is that Europe will march on, and at every iteration, each crisis will force more, not less, integration. The end game of the latest crisis will be a lurch towards fiscal federalism, political integration, and ultimately the end of the European nation-state as we know it. This will take time, and many, many millions of ordinary Europeans are deeply distrustful of the way in which their countries are moving. But the last 60 years of history suggests to us that plodding and moving slowly but decisively towards greater European unity is the blueprint which the vast majority of the European electorate sign up to time and time again.
Run, ever run,